Episode 201, Study Session 11, 5 Principles Generic for Social Work Practice. Introduction. There are 5 principles which are generic for social work practice, derived from the psychological, social, and process basis. In this study session, we'll examine the 5 principles of generic practice in social work. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to discuss the 5 principles generic for social work practice. Uses of the 5 principles generic for social work practice. The use of the 5 principles that constitutes the core method which leads to the particular social work process in which the social worker is engaged. The use of the principle is appropriate for the practice of social work in all its processes, both primary and secondary, and in any field within the general purview of social work. It is therefore suggested that the understanding, use of, and further development of these principles can form a unifying theoretical framework for method in social work. The 5 principles generic for social work practice are as follows. Principle 1. Diagnosis. Diagnosis is the understanding of the phenomenon served. This is very important in all social work processes, and it is related to the use of service. Engagement and participation of the clientele served is of paramount importance to the practice. Diagnosis succumbs to continuous modification as the phenomenon changes. The phenomenon served must be understood by the social worker. To work on diagnosis, the social worker must bring his knowledge and understanding to bear. Important here is his understanding of an individual, especially his knowledge of the growth process, the characteristics and needs of any and all individuals at various points in the life process, the varied ways of dealing with stress, both internal and external, the nature of the more common illnesses, physical, psychological, and psychosocial, and their more usual meanings to the individual affected and to others in his environment. Again, the worker brings to his work a rich understanding of the particular phenomenon he seeks to serve. The social worker derives some of these from records and reports of various kinds, available or secureable within his own and other agencies and institutions. Diagnosis in social work practice recognizes that people, groups, and communities do not stay put in categories, and that any attempt to place and keep them there and to plan service or help on the basis of a firm diagnosis made denies them potential for growth and change, and can actually be stultifying and inhibiting of growth, true to arbitrary and expectation of what can be expected from this kind of individual, group, or community. Smalley, 1967. However, the fact remains that the social worker brings an understanding of the phenomenon served, the kind of phenomenon served, and the particular phenomenon, which helps him to be realistic at the same time that he is open-minded. Diagnosis is used within the context of an understanding of method in social work, not as involving a way of study of an object, formulation of a plan, and carrying out a plan through enlisting the cooperation of the other, but rather as involving a way of engaging in a human relationship process which frees the other to define his own goals for himself. In other words, method in social work, as implied here, is viewed essentially as a method not for studying or diagnosing phenomena served, but as method for affecting phenomena served. Principle 2. Timing. Beginnings, middles, and endings. The effectiveness of any social work process, primary or secondary, is furthered by the social worker's conscious, knowing use of time phases in the processes, beginnings, middles, and endings, in order that the particular potential in each time phase may be fully exploited for the client's use. The beginning. It is a known fact that the beginning of any venture in which there are bound to be elements of the unknown, particularly a venture involving human relationship, and within which the one served by the social worker is expected to do something or become something, leads inevitably to feelings of hope, excitement, and the mobilization of energy. At the same time, it invokes fear, uncertainty, and even a setting of the self against, perhaps to protect a hardly won balance and sense of integrity. The social worker must douse intention in the client through such techniques as making the unknown known by, for example, being clear about his agency's services, the conditions under which it is available, what can be expected of it and of him as social worker, and what the requirements and expectations of the clients are. The known is less feared and more manageable than the unknown. At the same time, the social worker encourages immediate engagement of the other by expressing hopes, intentions, fears in respect to what is being offered in the way of service. Additional ways of furthering fruitful beginnings include the partialization or breaking up and breaking down of what can be felt as total problem or global purpose into something that is small enough to be encompassed and get started on as one piece of that problem or purpose. The social worker's responsibility, according to Smalley 1967, is to help the client find a place to take hold, to begin with some aspect or part of his problems, need, or intent. Experience in staying with and using the partialized focused service leads to the development of confidence and competence to cope with clients and related problems and needs. Nothing is so conducive to frustration and scatter as trying to do everything at once. Perhaps most essential of all are the social worker's sensitivity to what the client is experiencing in the beginning and his response to that feeling in a way appropriate to the situation, so that the client is free to move through and beyond feelings which may be impeding his getting started. Smalley 1967. Therefore, the social worker should exploit all possibilities to make the client stay with the beginning and let it be a beginning in all its inevitable awkwardness and tentativeness, rather than to rush to try to solve all problems in the first interview, group meetings, or conference that embodies skill in this aspect of social work process. The goal in any beginning is to facilitate finding a common base for the worker and clientele to work together towards a common purpose, with rules of the game known and its elements broken down into what can be encompassed for immediate engagement. The middle. Middles are generally conceived as more difficult to understand and utilize. Some authorities believe that there is no middle because the moment a client is in, his next stage is out, which is the exit of service. Some other authorities believe that middles do indeed exist. The middles are the very act of working together and what the social workers put in of professional concern, respect for the integrity of the client, and skillful help conducive to a deepening of worker-clientele relationship, which is then available for the clientele's use. Smalley 1967. The middle deepens the engagement and relationship established at the beginning. The social worker must therefore take responsibility for knowing how his or her patient, particularly potential, can be fully utilized for deepening of engagement and movement towards capacity for more independent functioning. Ending. Endings have their own feeling and quality. Just as beginnings are psychologically imbued with the feeling of birth, so endings are imbued on varying proportions and degree with the feeling of death and separation. As such, they are resisted and feared. When one has had an experience of significance, it is hard to end. However, every ending carries within its potential for a feeling of accomplishment, a sense of something lived through and taken into the self, and there is a wish to be free, to try it on one's own, to use the new power and the new self in the new situations. The issue remains that social workers intuitively and knowingly have done more with beginnings than with endings. Endings are usually allowed to happen when the client is wearied out and the relationship has lost its meaning. Exploitation of any ending involves recognizing either that it is going to occur or should occur in the interest of effective service and helping the client to recognize it, look at it, and capture his own accomplishments within it. To end is to experience the new self with its fresh courage and power and perhaps capacity for relationship through what has been done in relationship with the social worker and clients involved in the undertaking being completed. Principle 3. Agency function. The use of agency function in professional role gives focus, content, and direction to social work processes, assures accountability to society and to agency, and provides the partialization, the concreteness, and the difference, the giving, which furthers productive engagement. Smalley, 1967. Use of agency function in the social work processes, both primary and secondary. Request for what the social worker does, his part in the social work process in which he is engaged, be not related to, but also embody and constitute an implementation of the purpose of the social agency or institution within which he is functioning. The content of what goes on between the social worker and those he serves is determined both by the purpose of the agency of his employment and the purpose of his role within it. The social worker's goal should always be to realize those purposes, to make them come true to the fullest possible extent in the interest of the supporting society and agency and of the clientele served. For instance, a social case worker in an agency whose purpose is child placement should ensure and seek to carry out that purpose. The use of agency function as an integral part of social work skill offers a difference to the client or group who may come to an agency full of his or her own problems, need or intent, and full of projection that the agency will or will not be well disposed and helpful to them. Agency function requires the worker's use of all the resources of the community, medical, psychiatric, educational, recreational, economic, and religious. Use of agency function is also an integral aspect of skill in the primary processes of social case work, social group work, and community organization. Use of agency function is effective as well for the secondary processes. Supervision and administration are inevitably used to accomplish a purpose, and that purpose is some agency's production of service. The social work educator, whether teacher or administrator, is gearing his efforts to the accomplishment of an educational purpose, the purpose of a school of social work. The multiple service agency can make a full use of this principle as a single function agency, so long as it is responsible for the several services it is making available and establishes a structure for the administration which makes them most usable. Principle 4. Form or use of structure. A conscious knowing use of structure, as it involves form and is related to function and process, introduces form, which furthers the effectiveness of all the social work processes, both primary and secondary. Structure or form may be said to be a combination of related parts, the arrangement and organized union of parts in a body or object, specific mode or way in which anything is made or put together in such a way as to bind all members into some compact whole. Structure or form in each of the social work processes should arise from the process itself and serve to channel, contain, and make that process effective towards the realization of some agency function or purpose. Time itself may be used to give form or rather call for the development of form and structure in order that its potential may be realized. In fact, sometimes we ask about the form the interview or meeting will take in social work practice. A myriad of forms conduce to beginnings, application forms, intake forms, registration forms for each of the processes. For every process, it is necessary to establish a pattern to continue to sustain the process through a form, a series of meetings or interviews or sessions in such configuration, frequency, and overall duration as seem most likely to conduce to the realization of a particular purpose through a particular process. Place constitutes a kind of form and gives form to the several processes as well. Although a casework knows that an interview can be held anywhere, in a car or in a street corner, in the client's home as well as in an office, and that circumstances would suggest the most effective place in the individual instance. He knows too that holding a series of interviews in the same office can itself conduce to a stability, a form, a structure, which makes the interviews more usable by the clients. Indeed, when the place of an interview is changed, backward movement in the casework process may result. Place as structure needs not only to hold steady, but also to be suited to the undertaking of the function to be discharged. Policy also serves as structure and gives form to an undertaking. Once policy is established through an orderly process and with the intent of making more effective the carrying out of some agency purpose, it gives form to the particular undertaking and avoids the inequality and chaos which could result from lack of policy. Policy is designed to assure an operation that always works the same in like situations and that carries the intent of the program in its design. It embodies the comfort and accountability of a form, a structure in which the community, the social worker, and the clients can rely. Principle 5. Use of relationship. All social work processes, to be effective as processes in social work, require the use of relationship to engage the other in making and acting on choices or decisions as a core of working towards the accomplishment of a purpose within the purpose of the service offered. Engagement of the client is using client's own powers to work on his own problems or intent. Through making and acting on choices or decisions can be identified as central in all the processes of social work. A whole array of techniques is useful to further true engagement of the client in working on his own problem or intent in relation to a mutually affirmed purpose. Indeed, the use of all the principles previously developed is necessary for furthering productive engagement of the clientele, serve towards the accomplishment of own purpose through the use of own effort and power, with the social worker's help made available through a relationship process. Engagement is the initial period when practitioners orient themselves to the problem at hand and begin to establish communication and a relationship with others, also addressing the problem. Regardless of whether social workers pursue micro, that is casework, or meso, that is group work, or macro, that is community work, they must establish rapport with clients and target systems in order to communicate and get things done. Engagement is based on the acquisition of a range of micro skills, both the words social workers speak, that is verbal communication, and their coinciding actions and expressions, that is non-verbal communications, can engage others in the helping process. Kirst Ashman, 2007. Study session summary. In this study session, we discussed the 5 principles generic for social work practice that has been developed to further the practice and professionalism. Diagnosis or understanding of the phenomenon served is most effective for all the social work processes which is related to the use of the service, developed in part in the course of giving the service, with the engagement and participation of the clientele served, which is recognized as being subject to continuous modification as the phenomenon changes. End of study session 11. Thank you for listening.